because I'm aware of the time. I have been following for a few years now network of artists and collectives, cultural collectives in Peru. And the idea behind my research is that these cultural and artist collectives have been very important spaces for the elaboration of prefigurative politics in Peru in a context of deep degradation of politics and of social life in general. And so recently, and even now, we have a very strong protest movement in Peru that has found a very strong repression on an extreme right-wing coalition in govern now. And what I have been doing in the past few weeks is to follow these networks of cultural collectives and artists to see what their reaction was going to be to the protest movement after the ousting of President Castillo, because I don't know if you're aware at all of Peruvian politics, but in 2021, we had this president-elect that was a rural school teacher of peasant origin, who gathered quite an impressive support in the country. This is the Peruvian map. These are the results of the first round in the elections, and he won 138 electoral districts, mostly in a wide range of regions in the country where the majority of the population is of indigenous origin. And then we had a second round with just two running parties, Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of a dictator from the 1990s, a very corrupt regime, and Castillo in the red again, gathering the support of all the anti-Fujimoristas in Peru, but also these rural communities, mostly of indigenous origin. And the problem is that Castillo didn't have a real political support. Some people compare him with Evo Morales wrongly, because the MAS had behind a very strong support from different organizations, social movements in Bolivia, and that was not the case in Peru. So when Castillo was took out of power because of a very complicated situation, there was an immediate succession in power by his vice president, who immediately allied with the right in the country. So she was elected with a left-wing list, but was supported by the right. And the protest movement in the regions where supporters of Castillo are a majority rebelled. And there was a very strong protest movement with people from rural communities agreeing to go to Lima. So the movement is called La Marcha a Lima, no? And it was met with very brutal repression. There are this all started in the 7th of September, December. There are more than 60 dead people now, actually assassinated by the police. They have had an unlawful reaction that is covered by the regime with lies. There are, I don't know if you're aware, but there was New York Times news piece with lots of experts commenting on the nature of these crimes. So the repression has continued to be very, very strong. And what has happened in these weeks and months was that the protest movement has started to grow and grow, not necessarily in support of Castillo, but against the repression and the brutality of it, and also the implementation of incredibly destructive right-wing policies against nature, against laws protecting workers' rights, etc. So the movement then has grown enormously. Several hundreds of thousands of people from different regions in the country have gone to Lima in a very well-organized movement, delegating people from the communities, taking turns to get to the city. And this is when the collectives that I have been studying came into the protests. I was wondering what was going on with them. They were quite silent at the beginning of this moment. But when the communities started arriving to Lima, an incredible movement of solidarity started to protest against the repression, but also to support people coming to Lima. One very interesting fact is that the repression is not allowing people to march in the city center. So the shanty towns of Lima that make 60% of the population of an 11 million people city, so 60% of people live in the surrounding areas of the city, have started coming from the margins of the city to as close as possible as they can get, transforming the cartographies of protest, but also generating a very strong solidarity movement that has mobilized people in Lima. About 70% of the population in Lima are informal workers. And more than 60% of the population in Lima come from the highlands of the country. Lima is the city with the largest population of Quechua speakers in the country. So this has become a very important historical event in its demography, but also in the motivations, because the demands are deeply political. They are about the defense of their votes, because the governing president is governing against the program for what she was elected as vice president, and now she's the president. Also, people are protesting against the capturing by this right-wing coalition of 3 out of the 4 main powers in the country. So the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary are now in their hands, and they are going against the electoral power, which remains the only independent power at the moment, because they want to take control of the elections, the next elections. So the protest movement is deeply political. It is growing mostly out of solidarity because of the victims. And this is when the feminist part of the collectives I was studying have become quite important, because these collectives, these cultural and artistic collectives, mostly participate in social media, amplifying social movements. They also use performative arts to represent in the streets political issues and trying to garner more attention from the population in the streets. And so by using this type of media through artistic expressions, they join these movements, and many of them are part of these movements. So one of the things that they have done is to make evident a very important historical fact. Indigenous communities rely a lot on the wisdom of women. And when women decide to participate, there is no way back. And this is a well-known fact. Most streets demonstrations, etc., are characteristically populated by young people normally. This is not the case. So we have indigenous women coming to Lima with their children in their backs sometimes, but taking over the leadership of many of the demonstrations that are in place. And what has happened is that the visual artists from these collectives have made their mission to make this participation in all its materiality evident. The commitment of the women, their sacrifices, walking long distances, traveling long hours in the streets. No? So this is one of the missions that they have taken forward, which makes very visible the participation of these women. This is the list of the collectives that I have been following. Feminismo barrial, which is grassroots feminism from the shanty towns. Youth not organized in political parties, hip-hop groups that are quite widespread, collectives of first-generation university students, children of migrants, many of them of indigenous origin, and professionals of this generation. Artists who are part of these networks, meaning people who have grown in the shanty towns, are first-generation art students who see themselves as professional artists, but at the same time as activists, and territorial youth organizations. These are identities that sometimes overlap. No? So the same person can belong to many of these collectives. So I wanted to know when they were going to join the protest movements, why would they join, and how they would do it. I had several questions about, for example, the cultural distance or proximity that they would perceive between the people coming to Lima and themselves, the movements that I'm studying, even if they come from indigenous origin and they consider that as part of their identity, they are not rural anymore. Many of them have grandparents who spoke Quechua or Aymara, but they are monolingual speakers of Spanish, and they are quite cosmopolitan. So I was wondering about this encounter and what was going to happen with it. Also, I was wondering about the support for Castillo, because there is a lot of distrust. He was surrounded by a very murky group of people in power. There are lots of evidence of corruption in his regime, and etc. So I was wondering how the conversation was going to happen, because the people coming from rural areas to Lima were being hosted by people in the shanty towns, relatives, organizations of migrants from rural areas. And not always these collectives that I have been following are linked to that world. And the thing, when I talk about prefigurative politics, I am trying to explain what has happened, which is really interesting in terms of the confluence of the agendas, the conversation, but more than anything, the solidarity. So they are united against the lies of the press and the government, the denial of the political character of the mobilizations, the overpowering of the right wing of the main powers in the country, all the lies about the police brutality. So these are the issues that they have gathered around. And the other element is feminism. The recognition of the participation of indigenous women in the marches has been received by this movement, not only with great joy, but with a lot of respect and awareness of the political relevance of this participation. And the other important aspect of this has been the solidarity, which has been very striking if you consider that Peru is a country where distrust is massive. No one trusts your neighbor. And they have been using mobile money apps to donate money for the activities that have been going on. Lots of colectas of food, people bringing in their cars, collective transport, housing, medical attention, in a context, like I said, of corruption and massive distrust. Groups of volunteers have been attending the participants in the mobilizations. People from communal kitchens have been bringing food, but also gathering in the streets to support people marching to provide food for them. And all the graphic side of these art collectives have also participated a lot, contributing their time and work for the advertising of the activities, but also to respond the attacks from the government. There was an instance in which two people who had their little notebooks and the amount is close to 400 euros, no more than that, were taken prisoners because they were accused of funding the rebellion and funding the violence. So the response was, la solidaridad y el AINI no son delito. AINI is the name for communal work in Quechua communities. So the time and work that people put for collective works like cleaning water, irrigation channels, or building the roof of a communal place, etc. So AINI, this collaborative work, is not a crime. That's what they were saying, and against the criminalization of solidarity, basically. No? So they have created networks, espacios humanitarios autoconvocados, ollas comunes humanitarias autoconvocados, like self-calling people to organize solidarity. This is just one of thousands of posters that you can see mostly in Instagram, organizing solidarity, guiding people as to where to deposit money to the name Magda. So this just to tell you how trust is a very important element in these campaigns, where you don't ask if you want to donate, you just do it, and that's it. No? And there is a lot of educational activities around solidarity going on to support the presence of these hundreds or thousands of people without any resources. They came to Lima because they want to protest. No? Artists organize themselves. This is a list of some of the organizations that I am following that get together with the Red Nacional de Trabajadores de las Artes y las Culturas, putting together book fairs, bartering events, donating events, musical shows, just to guide and organize solidarity for this movement. They have also organized themselves to go to the prisons to see if there are indigenous peoples who have been there, and they try to find translators because the level of informality in the way prisoners are treated is just a scandal, and many times they have no resources to do anything. So the first task is actually to go and see if there are prisoners, because this is not published or anything. So there is a lot of activities around these support. And the feminist organizations that I was following have been really important leading these solidarity campaigns, activating their contacts with community kitchens in the barrios, organizing the donations, organizing events, and using social networks to amplify the participation of women, and also contesting the discourse by the president. Dina Boluarte is a woman from the highlands, and she says that the opposition she's facing is because of machismo. So the response from the feminist, the grassroots movements was immediate. There are lots of photographers and graphic artists among them. So they had this collection about the women who really represent us. So not the president, but mujeres luchadoras, las mujeres que cocinan con amor, las mujeres de regiones, las mujeres que retumban las calles, the batucada players that accompany many of the marches and that are quite urban, many times middle class. The health workers, women health workers, volunteers assisting in the marches that have very heavy repression. Las mujeres que resisten juntas, ¿no? So in these movements, in these circumstances, also, like I said before, many of these identities overlap. Artists have produced lots of aesthetic expressions to support these marches. And what is interesting is that a lot of these collectives have been participating in very important struggles in the past few years, achieving, for example, the repealing of anti-youth labor works, or even achieving the resignation of a president in 2020. And so in this circumstance, they have continued doing the things that they did before, but they have put a very interesting effort in producing spaces for conversation. What I was wondering about how the encounter was going to happen has happened in the shape of meetings in many different places, just producing conversations, collecting the testimonies of the people who came from the provinces to Lima in very precarious conditions, testimonies of people helping, donating their houses to house people, etc. So they have done that, and I think it's quite moving to see this reaction and how it has happened, how feminism has played a very important role in the conversations, but also how the aesthetic expressions that were part of the collectives that I was studying have become predominant, but not alone. So these are two nice posters by the Red Nacional de Trabajadores de las Artes y las Culturas, calling people to fight against the dictatorship and repression. With the Andes as a background, because that's where most of the people coming are from. This is a mural by Lizzie Ramirez, that is also a contribution to this moment. A lot of the iconography used for the memory of the internal war that we went through in Peru between the 80s and the 90s have come back. also as part of the iconography to embody protests now against the people assassinated by the repression in the past few weeks. Another poster by Lisi calling for the president to renounce, and performance. With this, I want to finish. These are very interesting pictures of performers. I don't know if you can tell who is who, and women from the countryside dressing in the same way together, singing and calling the same mottos to defend their symbols. In this case, this is just an anecdote, but it's quite interesting as another form of response to the repression and the disrespect from the government. A congressman insulted the huifala, which is a symbol of indigenous peoples. Is a flag also used in Bolivia and in Peru. And this congressman said that we only had one flag, the Peruvian flag, and that horrible piece of cloth looked like mantel de chifa, he said, like a tablecloth for a Chinese restaurant. And so that, of course, generated a reaction, and people went to the streets to defend the flag. But with dance, music, display of flags, but a coming together of women from the countryside and the performers who have taken the streets of Lima for many years now. And this is what I wanted to share with you.